Snow came down fast that morning in Hawthorne, thick enough to blur the streets and silence the town. That was when Officer James Walker noticed a little girl sitting alone beside a shuttered bus stop, her knees pulled tight to her chest. In her arms was a young German Shepherd puppy, barely old enough to stop shaking, wrapped in a threadbare coat far too big for him. A piece of cardboard rested against her boots. Written in uneven marker were 4 words: Police K9 Puppy, $5. But it wasn't the price that made the officer stop. It was the puppy. He was too young, too alert, too disciplined to belong on a sidewalk in the snow. When James stepped closer, the girl looked up. Her eyes were swollen red, her face stiff with cold and fear. "Sir," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the falling snow, "can you buy him?" "Please." James knelt slowly. Something wasn't right. "Sweetheart," he asked gently, "why are you selling a police dog? Puppy?" Her fingers tightened in the puppy's fur. "My dad," she said, her voice breaking. "He's sick, and I don't have any money to save him." Her words hit harder than the winter wind, and what the officer did next changed all of their lives. Before we begin, make sure to like and subscribe. And tell me, where are you watching from? Winter arrived early in Hawthorne, Colorado, the kind of mountain town where snow didn't just fall. It settled in and refused to leave. That morning, thick gray clouds pressed low against the rooftops, and heavy flakes drifted sideways on a sharp wind that sliced through coats and bones alike. Streets were quiet. Shops stayed shuttered. Only the distant hum of an engine or the crunch of boots reminded the town it was still awake. At the edge of Maple Street, beside an abandoned bus stop, a little girl sat perfectly still. Her name was Lucy Miller. Lucy was 10 years old, small for her age, with narrow shoulders and thin arms wrapped tightly around her knees. Her brown hair, usually tied neatly by her father, hung loose and tangled beneath a faded knit hat that had once been blue. Her coat was too large, the sleeves swallowing her hands, but it was worn thin at the elbows. She had the quiet posture of a child who had learned not to ask for too much space in the world. In front of her boots, leaning against the rusted metal bench, was a piece of cardboard torn from an old moving box. The words were written in black marker, uneven and shaking, as if the cold had fought her hand the entire time. Police K9 Puppy, $5. Pressed tightly against Lucy's side was a German Shepherd puppy. His name was Rex. Rex was barely 8 or 9 months old, all long legs and oversized paws, his body still growing into itself. His coat was classic black and tan, thick but dulled by cold, with a faint sheen where snowflakes melted and clung. One ear stood upright while the other bent slightly forward, giving him a look that was both alert and young. His amber eyes, sharp beyond his age, never stopped moving. Though Rex trembled from the cold, he angled his body between Lucy and the wind, sitting with his back toward the street, his chest shielding her legs. Every few seconds, he adjusted his position, instinctively blocking gusts of air that slipped through gaps in her coat. He was cold. He was scared. But he did not move away from her, not even once. A police cruiser rolled slowly down Maple Street. Behind the wheel was Officer James Walker. James was in his late 30s, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by years of winter patrols and sleepless nights. His dark hair was cut short, already flecked with gray at the temples, and his jaw carried the permanent tension of a man who rarely allowed himself to relax. He was known around town as dependable, quiet, and deeply private. There had been a time, years ago, when James believed following the rules would always lead to the right outcome. Life had corrected him. As his cruiser passed the bus stop, something made his foot ease off the gas. A flicker of movement. A shape that didn't belong. A child-sized silhouette where no child should be sitting on a morning like this. He stopped. The engine idled as James leaned forward, narrowing his eyes through the windshield. Then he saw the "I ho" sign and the dog. His chest tightened. No one sold puppies on sidewalks in winter. No one sold police dogs for $5. James pulled the cruiser to the curb and stepped out, the cold biting immediately through his uniform. Snow crunched under his boots as he approached, careful, slow, not wanting to startle either of them. Rex noticed him instantly. The puppy's body stiffened, his ears lifted, his eyes locked onto James with focused intensity, far too controlled for a dog his age. He did not bark. He did not growl. He simply shifted closer to Lucy, placing his body squarely between her and the approaching officer. James stopped a few feet away. "That's a good boy," he murmured quietly, more to himself than the dog. Lucy looked up. Her face was pale, her cheeks raw from the cold, her lips cracked. Her eyes, large and dark, were red and swollen, as if she had been crying long before James arrived. There was no fear in them, only exhaustion. "I'm not doing anything." "Wrong," she said quickly, her voice thin and trembling. James knelt so he wouldn't tower over her. "I know," he said gently. "I just want to talk." Lucy nodded, though her fingers tightened in Rex's fur. "What's your name?" James asked. "Lucy." "That's a nice name," he said. "I'm James. I'm a police officer." Rex's gaze never left him. James glanced at the cardboard sign. "Is that yours?" Lucy hesitated, then nodded. "You're selling him?" James asked. "Yes, sir." "For $5? "Yes." James studied the puppy again. The posture, the restraint, the way Rex tracked his movements without panic. "This dog isn't just a pet," James said carefully. Lucy swallowed. "I know." "Why are you selling him, Lucy?" She looked down at the snow, at her boots soaked through at the seams. "We can't keep him anymore," she said. "That's all." It was a lie. James recognized it immediately. Not because he was a cop, but because he had told that same lie himself once. Years earlier, before Hawthorne, before the badge meant more weight than pride, James had stood across from a family in foreclosure. A mother, 2 kids, promises that help was coming. Paperwork, waiting lists, systems that moved too slowly. He remembered the look on that mother's face when the bank trucks arrived anyway. He had driven away that day knowing he had followed every rule and failed completely. A sudden police siren wailed in the distance, another cruiser responding somewhere across town. Rex reacted instantly. His body shifted forward, ears snapping to attention, muscles tensing. He let out a short, sharp bark, not panicked, not playful, but alert. Then he sat again, eyes scanning the street, posture resetting as if someone had flicked a switch. James's breath caught. "That response," he murmured. Lucy noticed his expression and hugged Rex tighter. Before James could speak again, movement caught his eye from across the street. An elderly woman stood near the entrance of a closed grocery store. She was thin, hunched, wrapped in layers of mismatched clothing. 3 coats, none of them warm enough. Wisps of white hair escaped from beneath a torn scarf. Her hands were bare, red, and cracked from the cold. She watched Lucy for a long moment without saying a word. Then slowly, she crossed the street. Lucy stiffened. Rex's head turned, tracking her approach. The woman stopped beside Lucy, her movements careful, almost reverent. Without speaking, she reached into her coat and pulled out a thick wool scarf, gray and frayed, but clean. She gently draped it over Lucy's shoulders, tucking it around her neck. "There," the woman whispered. "Wind's cruel today." Lucy blinked. "Thank you." The woman gave a small nod, her eyes lingering on Rex. "He's protecting you," she said softly. Lucy nodded. Without another word, the woman turned and walked away, disappearing down the street as quietly as she had come. James watched her go, something heavy settling in his chest. He looked back at Lucy. "You're not here because you can't keep him," James said gently. "You're here because you don't know what else to do." Lucy's eyes filled with tears. She didn't answer. Snow continued to fall. Rex leaned into her, steady and warm, despite his shaking. James exhaled slowly, the cold air burning his lungs. Whatever this was, it wasn't a simple sail, and it wasn't over. The snow kept falling, steady and indifferent, layering Maple Street in white. James stayed kneeling in front of Lucy, his gloved hands resting loosely on his thighs, giving her space. Rex remained pressed against her side, his body angled outward like a small shield, eyes tracking every movement around them. The puppy's breathing was quick but controlled, a rhythm learned rather than instinctive. A man passed on the opposite sidewalk, head down, coat pulled tight. Rex noticed him immediately. His ears tipped forward, shoulders stiffening just enough to signal readiness. When the man slowed, glancing curiously at the sign, Rex rose halfway, placing himself squarely between Lucy and the stranger. No bark this time, just a low, contained alertness that made James's pulse tick faster. "Easy," James murmured, not as a command, but a reassurance. The man hesitated, shrugged, and moved on. Rex eased back down, never taking his eyes off the retreating figure until he was gone. James looked from the dog to Lucy. "That wasn't fear," he said quietly. "That was training." Lucy's chin trembled. She stared at her boots, then at the cardboard sign, as if it might disappear if she looked hard enough. "He's still learning," she whispered. "Dad says he's not supposed to be perfect yet." James nodded. "What's his name?" "Rex." The way she said it, soft, protective, told him everything. James straightened slightly and reached into his jacket, pulling out his phone. "Lucy," he said, careful to keep his tone even, "I need to ask you something, and you don't have to answer if you're not ready." She nodded once. "Did your dad train Rex?" Her shoulders sagged. The fight went out of her all at once. Tears spilled freely now, hot against cold cheeks. "I'm not selling him," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I'm selling me and him. I thought if someone bought Rex, they'd take care of him. And if they took him, maybe they'd help me too. Or maybe I could get the money before they changed their mind." James's chest tightened so hard it hurt. "How much do you need?" he asked gently. Lucy shook her head. $5 isn't enough, I know that, but it's all people look at. If I write more, they won't stop." She wiped her nose with her sleeve. "Dad needs his breathing medicine, the one with the blue cap. It makes the air stop hurting him." James closed his eyes for a brief moment, steadying himself. Then he unlocked his phone and stepped a few feet away, turning his back slightly for privacy. He dialed a number he hadn't used in months, the non-emergency line connected to K9 records. "This is Officer James Walker," he said when the call connected. "I need to verify a K9 trainee registration, German Shepherd, name Rex." He listened, eyes fixed on the falling snow. Lucy watched him anxiously, fingers buried in Rex's fur. The puppy leaned into her touch, tail still, body quiet. "Handler's name?" the voice on the other end asked. James hesitated only a second. "Mark Miller." There was a pause, then typing. "Yes," the voice said. "K9 trainee, 8 months, assigned to Mark Miller. Status: inactive pending medical leave." James swallowed. Medical leave? "Handler sustained lung damage during a training accident," the voice replied. "Unable to complete Rex's certification cycle." James ended the call slowly. When he turned back, Lucy was crying openly now, shoulders shaking. Rex nudged her chin with his nose, licking the salt of her tears from her skin. "You don't have to say anything," James said. "I already know." Lucy sniffed. "He was supposed to be Dad's last partner," she said. "After Rex, Dad said he'd retire for real. No more danger." Her gaze drifted, unfocused, slipping into memory. She remembered the night Rex came home. It had been late, snow just beginning to fall. Her father, Mark Miller, stood in the doorway holding a bundle that wriggled and squeaked. Mark was a tall man with a lean build, worn thinner by illness, his once broad shoulders sloping now as if carrying invisible weight. His face, lined early from years of service, had softened since leaving the field. Where he once carried authority, he now carried patience. "He's small," Lucy had said, peeking inside the blanket. "That's because he's a baby," Mark had laughed, the sound rough but warm. "And babies need families." Rex had tumbled onto the floor, paws too big, ears unsure which direction to stand. He had slipped, rolled, then scrambled up and toddled straight into Lucy's legs. She had dropped to her knees instantly, giggling as he licked her hands. "Like a little brother," she whispered now. James listened, silent. Lucy wiped her eyes. "Dad used to sit on the floor with him, teaching him how to wait, how to listen. Even when Dad couldn't breathe right, he'd still try." She looked down at Rex. "Rex listens to him better than anyone." James believed that. He had seen enough working dogs to know loyalty didn't come from commands alone. A gust of wind cut across the street. Lucy shivered. Rex adjusted again, placing his body closer, his flank pressed against her coat. James shrugged out of his own jacket without thinking and draped it around her shoulders, tucking it carefully so it wouldn't scare Rex. Lucy looked up at him, startled. "Sir!" "You're freezing," James said, simply. She didn't argue. A woman stepped out of the closed bakery down the block. She was young, early 30s, tall and slender, with dark hair pulled into a tight bun and flour dusting the sleeves of her coat. Her name, James would later learn, was Sarah Donnelly. She paused when she saw them, concern flickering across her face. "Everything okay?" she called. Before Lucy could answer, Rex shifted again, eyes sharp. Sarah stopped, immediately, raising her hand slightly, respectful. "It's all right," James said. "He's working." Sarah nodded, understanding more than she let on. She offered a small smile to Lucy, then retreated back inside, leaving the door cracked open just enough to spill warm air into the street. Lucy watched the door close. "People don't come close anymore," she said quietly. "They look at Rex and get scared." James frowned. "That's not fair to him." "He doesn't mind," Lucy said, "as long as Dad's okay." James looked at the sign again. The cardboard sagged under melting snow, ink beginning to blur. "This dog is too young to be sold," he said firmly. "And you're too young to carry this alone." Lucy shook her head. I don't know what else to do." James inhaled slowly, making a decision he didn't yet fully understand. "Where's your dad right now?" he asked. "At home," Lucy said. "Sleeping. I left early so he wouldn't wake up." James nodded. He didn't say what he was thinking, that no child should be making plans like this before sunrise. He stood, extending his hand. "Lucy, I'm not here to take Rex away, and I'm not here to arrest you." Her eyes widened. "I just want to help," he continued. "But first, we need to get you out of the cold." Rex looked up at him, ears pricked, gaze searching. For a moment, James wondered if the dog could sense intention. Rex sat. Perfectly. James felt something shift inside him. The snow kept falling. But for the first time that morning, the air felt less empty. The drive to Lucy's house took less than 10 minutes, but the world seemed to change with every block they passed. The streets grew narrower, the houses older, their paint faded by years of wind and snow. Porch lights were dark, windows frosted over from the inside. This was the part of Hawthorne most people drove through without looking, especially in winter. James parked at the curb and stepped out first. The cold hit harder here, sharper, as if the wind had found a permanent home between these houses. Lucy climbed out slowly, Rex hopping down beside her, his paws crunching on ice. He paused immediately, nose lifted, scenting the air. His body stiffened, not with fear, but recognition. "This way," Lucy said softly. The house sat slightly back from the street, small and narrow, its porch sagging on one side. The paint had once been white, but now peeled in long strips, exposing gray wood beneath. The front steps were dusted with snow that hadn't been disturbed in days. Lucy hesitated before unlocking the door. Rex moved ahead of her, tail low, posture alert, waiting. When the door creaked open, cold spilled out like breath from a cave. It was colder inside than it was outside. James felt it immediately, the kind of cold that didn't sting but settled deep into bone. The air was still, stale, carrying the faint metallic scent of old machinery and medicine. The living room was dim, lit only by a single lamp that flickered as if unsure whether to keep going. Blankets were piled everywhere, on chairs, across the couch, folded against the wall. In the corner stood a space heater, unplugged, its casing cracked. Near the couch sat an oxygen tank, small and nearly empty, its gauge hovering just above red. On the couch lay Mark Miller. He looked smaller than Lucy's memories had suggested. Mark was tall by nature, his frame once strong and athletic, but illness had stripped him down to something fragile. His face was pale, almost gray, cheeks hollow, beard grown unevenly where shaving had become too much effort. His chest rose and fell shallowly, each breath a quiet struggle. "Dad," Lucy whispered. Mark stirred slightly, eyelids fluttering. He tried to sit up and failed, a weak cough tearing through him. "Lucy!" His voice was hoarse, barely more than air. "What are you doing home?" James stepped forward. "Sir, stay still. You don't need to move." Mark's eyes shifted to him, confusion sharpening into alarm. "Who?" "It's okay," Lucy said quickly, kneeling beside the couch. "This is Officer Walker. He helped me." Mark's jaw tightened. Shame flickered across his face before he could stop it. "I told you not to go out," he rasped. "It's too cold." Lucy lowered her head. "I know." Rex padded forward quietly. Without hesitation, he reached the couch, lifted one paw, then gently placed a chewed rubber toy, faded red, missing one corner, on the blanket near Mark's hand. He nudged it closer, with his nose, then sat back, watching Mark's face. James noticed the movement immediately. "That's deliberate," he said softly. Mark managed a weak smile as his fingers brushed the toy. "He does that when I'm not breathing right," he said. "It's part of his routine." Lucy glanced up. "You taught him that?" Mark nodded faintly. "I taught him everything I could, before." James's gaze drifted around the room. No food on the counter. No warmth. No sign of recent visitors. "Do you have heat at all?" James asked. Mark shook his head. "The furnace went out weeks ago. I couldn't fix it. Didn't have the money." Lucy hugged her arms around herself. Rex stood and repositioned, sitting closer to Mark's legs, his body angled protectively toward the rest of the room. Even now, he was working. James moved toward the back window and frowned. The neighboring house was empty, its windows boarded. Another next door showed signs of recent vacancy. Mail piled at the door, a realtor's sign half buried in snow. "Your neighbors?" James asked quietly. "They helped when they could," Mark said. "The Johnsons brought soup. Mrs. Alvarez fixed the heater once, but they moved out in the fall. Rent got too high." James nodded grimly. He turned back to Mark. "Lucy told me Rex was meant to be your last partner." Mark closed his eyes for a moment, breathing shallow. "He was going to be my successor," he said. "Not just a partner, a legacy." James tilted his head. "Successor?" "I wasn't supposed to keep working forever," Mark continued. "Rex was supposed to finish what I started. I was training him for the K-9 unit, but also for Lucy, so she'd never be alone." Lucy's throat tightened. Rex lifted his head at the sound of his name, ears pricked, eyes moving between Mark and James. "I trained him to listen for breath changes," Mark said. "Cough patterns, panic. I didn't know if he'd be certified in time, but I wanted him ready." James felt the weight of that settle over him. "You trained him like a replacement," James said carefully. "No," Mark corrected softly. "I trained him like family." A fit of coughing seized Mark suddenly. His chest rattled, each breath sounding wetter than the last. Lucy jumped up instinctively, panic flashing across her face. "Dad!" Rex reacted instantly. He stood, placing his front paws against the couch, nose inches from Mark's face, watching his breathing with laser focus. His body trembled, not from cold, but urgency. James moved quickly, checking the oxygen tank. The gauge dipped lower. "You're almost out," he said. Mark nodded weakly. "I know." Lucy's eyes filled with tears. "I was going to get more," she whispered. "I just needed time." Mark looked at her, confused. "Get more how?" She froze. James stepped in smoothly. "We'll talk about that later," he said gently. Mark studied Lucy's face, then Rex, then the cardboard sign Lucy still clutched in her hand. His eyes widened as understanding dawned. "No," he whispered. "Lucy, tell me you didn't—" "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I didn't know what else to do." Mark turned his head away, tears slipping into his beard. His hand shook as it rested against the blanket. "I failed you," he said. James felt something tighten in his chest. "No," he said firmly. "You didn't." Mark looked up, eyes glassy. "I couldn't protect my own child." "You protected her by teaching her how to survive," James replied. "But she shouldn't have to." Rex whined softly, pressing his head against Mark's arm, then nudging Lucy's knee, as if stitching them together again. The lamp flickered. James glanced around the room once more, cataloging what he saw, not as an officer, but as a man. The cold, the silence, the way Lucy hovered like she was afraid to take up space. "This house isn't livable," James said quietly. "Not like this." Mark nodded, exhaustion overtaking pride. "I know," James straightened. "You don't know me," he said, "but I'm not walking away from this." Lucy looked up at him, startled. Rex sat, perfectly still. Outside, the wind howled against the walls, rattling loose siding. Inside, 3 lives clung to what little warmth they had left. And James understood, fully now, that this wasn't just a house without heat. It was a family running out of time. The coughing returned without warning. Mark's body stiffened first, a sharp intake of breath that never fully arrived. His chest hitched, shallow and uneven, as if the air itself had become something heavy he had to fight through. The sound that followed wasn't loud. It was worse than that. A wet, rattling wheeze that scraped its way out of his lungs and left nothing behind. Lucy froze. "Dad," her voice cracked as she stepped closer to the couch. "Dad, breathe. Please breathe." James was already moving, kneeling beside Mark, one hand hovering near his shoulder, the other instinctively reaching for the oxygen tank. The gauge dipped again, trembling just above empty. Then Rex reacted. The puppy's entire body snapped to attention, faster than thought. His ears shot forward, tail rigid, eyes locked on Mark's chest. He surged to his feet and pressed his nose close to Mark's mouth, sniffing rapidly, then pulled back with a sharp bark that echoed through the cold room. "Rex!" Lucy gasped. Rex barked again, louder this time. Not playful, not panicked, urgent. James felt a jolt of recognition run through him. "He's sensing something," he muttered. Rex circled once, pacing hard against the narrow space between the couch and the coffee table, then darted straight to James. Before James could react, the puppy clamped his teeth, not hard, but firm, around the hem of James's pant leg and tugged. "Hey," James started. Rex pulled again, more force this time, then released and sprinted back to Mark, barking sharply, snapping his head toward the couch, then back to James. It wasn't chaos. It was direction. James's heart slammed against his ribs. "Lucy," he said quickly, "step back." Lucy stumbled away, clutching the blanket around her shoulders. Her eyes were wide with terror. Rex returned to Mark, front paws up on the couch now, barking in short, rapid bursts, his nose hovering inches from Mark's face. Mark's lips had begun to turn faintly blue. His breaths came in short, shallow gasps, each one weaker than the last. "He's going into respiratory distress," James said aloud, more to steady himself than anyone else. Rex darted back again and grabbed James's pant leg once more, pulling harder, almost dragging him toward the oxygen tank, then toward the front door. "I see it," James said, adrenaline flooding his system. "I see it." James yanked his phone from his pocket and dialed 911 with shaking fingers. "Medical emergency," he said, the moment the call connected. "Adult male, severe respiratory distress, oxygen depleted, lung damage history. We need an ambulance now." As he spoke, Rex returned to Mark, planting himself between Lucy and the couch, barking sharply every time Mark's breathing faltered. The puppy's body trembled with intensity, every instinct screaming. Lucy dropped to her knees beside him, tears streaming down her face. "Rex, please," she sobbed. "Help him." Rex turned his head briefly and licked her cheek once, then refocused, barking again, louder now, relentless. Sirens wailed in the distance, faint but growing. James stayed on the line, relaying updates. "He's losing color," he said, "breathing shallow, pulse weak." Mark's eyes fluttered open for a moment, unfocused. His lips parted as if to speak, but only a thin wheeze escaped. "Stay with me, Mark," James urged. "Help is coming." Rex let out a deep, sharp bark, different from the others, commanding. Mark's chest jerked, drawing in a slightly deeper breath, then another. It wasn't enough, but it was something. Lucy stared at Rex through tears. "Officer," she whispered, the word slipping out without thought. "Please don't let him die." Rex didn't look at her this time. He didn't need to. The front door burst open as the paramedics rushed in, bringing with them a rush of cold air and urgency. The lead medic was a broad man in his 40s, with a shaved head and calm eyes. Ethan Brooks, someone who had seen too many winters like this one. Behind him was Maya Lynn, younger, quick-moving, her dark hair pulled tight beneath her cap, her expression focused and sharp. "What have we got?" Ethan asked, already kneeling beside the couch. James gave a rapid report. Chronic lung damage, oxygen nearly depleted, no heat, worsening distress. Maya reached for the oxygen mask. "Sir, I'm going to help you breathe," she said gently to Mark. As she fitted the mask, Rex hovered inches away, watching every movement, muscles taut, ready. When Maya shifted closer, Rex barked once, sharp and warning. "It's okay," Lucy cried. "She's helping." James placed a steady hand on Rex's side. "Good boy," he said quietly. "They're here." Rex hesitated, then stepped back just enough to allow space. But he did not leave. His eyes stayed locked on Mark's face, tracking each breath as the oxygen began to flow. Ethan glanced at the puppy, eyebrows lifting. "That's a canine response," he murmured. "From a dog that young?" James nodded grimly. "He was trained." Maya checked Mark's vitals, her fingers moving fast. "You're lucky," she said to James under her breath. "Another few minutes." She didn't finish the sentence. The stretcher was brought in quickly. As they lifted Mark, Lucy cried out and rushed forward, clutching his hand. "Dad, I'm here," she sobbed. "I'm right here." Rex followed, whining softly, his nose pressed against the edge of the stretcher. When they wheeled Mark toward the door, Rex moved with them, step for step, refusing to fall back. "Wait!" Lucy cried. "Rex!" Ethan glanced at James. "He's not leaving!" James made a decision in that moment, fast and irreversible. "I'm coming with you," he said, "and the dog stays with the girl." Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "Fine, but we move now." Outside, the snow had thickened, swirling violently beneath flashing red lights. The ambulance doors opened, spilling warmth and light into the night. As they loaded Mark inside, Rex jumped forward, front paws braced against the bumper, barking sharply. Lucy grabbed his collar, her hands shaking. "It's okay," she whispered through tears. "You did it. You helped him." Rex looked at her then, ears twitching, eyes wide and bright. He let out a soft whine and leaned into her, pressing his forehead against her chest. "Thank you, officer," Lucy whispered again, her voice breaking. "Thank you." James watched the doors close, the siren rising as the ambulance pulled away. His shift had ended 20 minutes ago. He didn't care. He looked down at Lucy, wrapped in his jacket, kneeling in the snow with a puppy who had just saved a life. James exhaled slowly, a decision settling deep in his bones. He wasn't going anywhere. The hospital corridor smelled of disinfectant and burnt coffee, a sharp, sterile contrast to the cold house they had left behind. Lucy sat on a plastic chair with her knees pulled to her chest, James's jacket wrapped tightly around her small frame. Rex lay at her feet, alert despite exhaustion, his head resting on his paws, but his eyes tracking every footstep that passed. He had not slept. Neither had James. Mark had been taken through double doors an hour earlier. No one had said much since. James stood near the wall, phone pressed to his ear, voice low. "Emergency housing," he said, for the third time that night. "Yes, tonight, a sick veteran and his child." He listened, jaw tightening. "I understand your process, but they don't have heat. He nearly died." A pause. "Weeks isn't an option." He ended the call and immediately dialed another number, then another, social services, veterans assistance, temporary housing, medical aid programs. Each call followed the same arc: sympathy first, procedure next, delay last, forms, waiting lists, office hours that did not include midnight emergencies. Lucy watched him, hope rising and falling with every shake of his head. "They said no?" she asked quietly. "Not no," James replied. "Not yet." She nodded, as if she had expected that answer. Rex shifted closer to her, pressing his warm flank against her leg. She rested her hand on his head, fingers curling into his fur. A nurse approached them. Angela Ruiz was in her late 20s, short and sturdy, her dark hair braided tight down her back. Her eyes were kind but tired, the look of someone who had learned to carry other people's fear without showing her own. "He's stable," she said gently, still critical but breathing easier with oxygen. Lucy exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Can I see him?" "Not yet," Angela said softly, "but soon." James nodded his thanks. As Angela walked away, Rex's ears followed her steps, then settled again. James looked down at the puppy. "You did good," he murmured. Rex thumped his tail once against the floor, then stilled, gaze steady. James stepped away again, phone already in his hand. He scrolled through contacts he hadn't touched in years, names from a life before patrol shifts and quiet nights. Old partners, trainers, people who understood what it meant to put everything into service and still fall through the cracks. He made the first call. "Tom, it's James Walker. We worked K-9 training back in Durango. I need a favor." An hour later, James had made more progress than the system had managed in months. The first to arrive was Caleb Reed, a former K-9 trainer who had once mentored Mark. Caleb was a tall, broad man in his 50s with a weathered face and hands scarred from decades of leash work and bite training. His gray beard was neatly trimmed, his movements calm and deliberate. Life had softened him, but not dulled him. Caleb knelt in front of Rex immediately, offering the back of his hand to sniff. Rex leaned forward, nose working, then sat. Caleb's eyebrows rose. "That's a disciplined sit," he said quietly. "From a dog that age, Mark did this." Lucy nodded. "Dad trained him every day." Caleb glanced at James. "He was grooming Rex as a successor," he said. "I wondered how far he'd gotten before the accident." "He taught him to listen for breathing," James replied. Caleb exhaled slowly. "That explains tonight." Word traveled faster than James expected. By morning, people were calling him back. A retired officer offering blankets. A woman from a local nonprofit asking what size clothes Lucy wore. Someone else promising groceries. At dawn, the hospital lobby filled with quiet footsteps and low voices. The woman from the bakery, Sarah Donnelly, appeared with a paper bag clutched to her chest. In daylight, she looked even more slender, her pale skin drawn, tight from years of early mornings and hard work. She set the bag down beside Lucy. "Muffins," she said softly. "Blueberry, warm." Lucy looked up, startled. "Thank you." Sarah smiled. a quick, genuine curve of the mouth that hinted at kindness tempered by loss. James would later learn she'd lost her brother, a firefighter, years ago. She helped because she remembered what it felt like when no one did. Outside the hospital, snow continued to fall, but the air felt different, less heavy. By mid-morning, James stood in the small waiting room making one last call. This one wasn't official. It was personal. "Eli," he said when the line connected, "I need a heater fixed, no charge, today." Eli Parker owned the hardware store on Main Street. A stocky man with a permanent oil stain on his jacket and a reputation for helping quietly, he didn't ask questions. "Send me the address," Eli said. "I'll bring parts." James ended the call and leaned back against the wall, exhaustion finally catching up with him. Lucy watched him. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. James considered the question. "Because once, a long time ago," he said slowly, "I watched a family lose everything while I followed the rules." Rex lifted his head at the change in his voice. "I won't do that again." That afternoon, Mark was awake enough to speak. His voice was still weak, but his eyes were clear. Lucy sat beside him, Rex lying at her feet, his chin resting on the edge of the bed. Caleb stood near the window, arms crossed. "He's got instincts," he said, nodding toward Rex. "I'd like to see him certified when he's ready." Mark's eyes filled. "He deserves that," Caleb smiled. "He's already earned it." Before leaving, Caleb pulled a small laminated card from his pocket and clipped it gently to Rex's collar. It bore a simple seal and a line of text: K9 trainee, honorary status. Lucy gasped. "Is that real?" Caleb winked. "Real enough to remind people who he is." Rex tilted his head, the card tapping softly against his chest, then sat straighter, as if he understood. By nightfall, a small online fund had taken shape. Nothing grand, just a page shared quietly among former officers, trainers, neighbors, and friends of friends. Donations trickled in, $10, $20, $50, enough to matter. James stood by the hospital window watching snow settle on the streetlights below. His shift had ended long ago. No one had asked him to stay. He stayed anyway, because sometimes the system didn't fail loudly. It failed politely, with apologies and timelines. And sometimes the only thing standing between that failure and survival was a handful of people willing to step forward. James looked back at Lucy, asleep now, her head resting against Rex's side. The puppy remained awake, eyes open, vigilant, breathing steady. James knew then that whatever came next, none of them would face it alone. Spring reached Hawthorne quietly, not all at once, but in small permissions. Snow melted into thin rivers along the curb. Sunlight lingered longer on the porch steps. The town still wore winter's marks, but it was learning how to breathe again. So was Mark Miller. He sat in a sturdy armchair near the living room window, a lightweight oxygen line resting comfortably beneath his nose. Color had returned to his face, slowly, unevenly, but unmistakably. His shoulders were still narrow from illness, yet he held himself straighter now, like a man remembering the shape of strength. He smiled more easily. He laughed without coughing. Across the room, Lucy knelt on the rug, surrounded by crayons and paper. She was taller than she'd been a month ago, or at least she carried herself that way. Chin lifted, shoulders no longer folded inward. Her hair was tied back neatly again, her clothes clean and warm. The careful quiet that once defined her had softened into something lighter. Beside her lay Rex. He had grown too. His legs were longer, his chest broader, his coat gleaming with health. The bent ear still tipped forward, giving him that same earnest expression, but his movements were more controlled now, his awareness sharper. When Lucy laughed, his tail wagged. When Mark coughed, his head lifted, always listening, always ready. The house hummed with warmth. The furnace, newly repaired, whispered steadily in the background. Fresh paint brightened the walls. The windows had been sealed. The draft chased away. On the kitchen counter sat a basket of groceries and a loaf of bread still warm from the bakery. The front door opened, and James Walker stepped inside, brushing dust from his coat. James looked different too, not outwardly. His uniform was the same, his posture still careful, but there was something lighter in his eyes. The quiet weight he carried had shifted, redistributed among people who no longer let him hold it alone. "Hey," he said. Lucy scrambled to her feet and ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "You're late," she accused gently. James smiled. "I brought homework help as an apology." Rex trotted over, sitting neatly at James's side. His tail tapped the floor once, then stopped. "Good to see you, officer," Mark said. James met his gaze. "You sound better," Mark nodded. "I feel better." They stood in the calm for a moment, the kind that only follows long storms. Later that afternoon, the mail arrived. Lucy carried the envelopes inside, sorting carefully. One bore the emblem of the K-9 unit. Her hand shook as she opened it. She read silently, then looked up at Rex, eyes shining. "He's accepted," she whispered. Mark leaned forward. "Accepted? For formal training," Lucy said, her voice breaking into a grin. "When he's old enough." Rex barked once, sharp and proud, then sat straighter. James laughed softly. "Looks like he already knows." Mark watched Rex with a complicated expression, pride threaded with something heavier. When Lucy returned to her drawings, Mark gestured for James to sit. "There's something I need to ask you," Mark said. James settled into the chair across from him. Mark's hands rested on his knees, fingers thin but steady. "You've done more for us than I can ever repay," he said quietly. "You didn't have to stay. You didn't have to fight the system. But you did." James shook his head. "Anyone would have." Mark's smile was gentle but knowing. "No," he said. "They wouldn't." He took a breath. "Rex deserves structure, training, a future where he can do what he was born to do. And you," he met James's eyes, "you'd be a good handler." James understood immediately what Mark was offering. "No," he said without hesitation. Mark blinked. "James..." "He's already where he belongs," James said softly. "With you. With Lucy." Lucy looked up from the floor. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," James said. "Just grown-up talking." Mark studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You're right." Lucy reached into her backpack and pulled out something folded and familiar. The cardboard sign. The edges were bent. The ink was faded. "Police K-9 Puppy, $5. She smoothed it carefully and taped it to her bedroom wall. Then, beneath the old words, she added new ones in careful block letters. "Not for sale anymore." That night, they took a photograph. Sarah from the bakery stopped by with muffins. Caleb sent a message of congratulations. James set the camera on a shelf and stepped into frame at Lucy's insistence. The picture captured 4 figures. Lucy smiling wide, Mark standing behind her with a hand on her shoulder, Rex sitting tall at her side, and James kneeling just enough to fit them all. The photo went on the wall the next morning. Weeks passed. Lucy returned to school, walking with friends instead of watching from some distance. James became a regular presence, not as a rescuer, but as a constant. He helped with homework. He attended training sessions with Rex. He listened. When Rex reached the right age, he entered formal K-9 training. Lucy watched from the fence, hands clasped, eyes bright. "He's going to be great," James said. "He already is," she replied. On a warm afternoon, Lucy sat on her bed beneath the old sign and opened a notebook. On the first page, she wrote, $5 wasn't the price. It was the beginning. Down the hall, Rex slept in a patch of sunlight, one ear bent forward, chest rising steady and strong. Outside, Hawthorne carried on, and inside a small house that once had no heat at all, a future took root, warm, steady, and finally safe. Sometimes the greatest struggles do not look dramatic. They look like a quiet child sitting in the cold, trying to solve problems that should never belong to them. They look like someone doing their best in silence, hoping the world will not notice how close they are to breaking. This story reminds us that help does not always come from systems or forms or perfect solutions. Often it comes from ordinary people who choose to stop, to see, and to care. A small act, a listening ear, a decision not to walk away. In our daily lives, we may never face a moment as extreme as Lucy's, but we pass people every day who are carrying more than we can see. A coworker who is tired for reasons they do not share. A neighbor who is quiet because asking for help feels like failure. A child who is growing up too fast because no one has noticed they need support. Kindness does not require authority. Compassion does not require permission. Sometimes being present is already enough to change a life. If this story touched you, please share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us what part stayed with you. Subscribe to the channel so more stories like this can reach people who feel alone. And as we close, we say a simple prayer together. May God bless you and your family. May He protect those who are struggling in silence. May He soften our hearts so we never ignore a cry for help. And may He remind us that even small acts of love can save lives. If you believe in this message, type Amen in the comments.